Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to In Balance, a podcast where we explore how faith and health, both physical and mental, intertwine in our daily lives and how we can finally find balance as Muslims. Welcome to the 5th episode of the podcast. I pray you're all doing well, inshallah. And I have to start once again by thanking you all so much for all your support. Honestly, it's been such an honor, and it's been so heartwarming to read your feedback and your DMs and to see your stories of you listening to Imbalance in your daily life. It's been such an amazing experience, and I feel very blessed. Alhamdulillah, I am so glad that you've been finding the conversations so relatable and helpful and insightful. So jazakumullah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you endlessly, and thank you so much once again for supporting this little project of mine, which I'm saying is little because we're already mid-season, and I know some of you are going to think that this season is pretty short, but I didn't want to commit to a lot of episodes if no one was going to listen to it, basically. So do let me know if you would like a season 2. But yes, we're already mid-season. And the other thing that I wanted to let you guys know was that today's one, is going to be the last one of 2023 because your girl needs to take some rest. More seriously, as much as I enjoy working on the podcast, I think I really underestimated the amount of work that was involved in it. From, working on the interviews to doing the recordings to the editing part. It's a lot of hours, and the last few weeks have been very intense. Ramadan is coming up, which is the busiest time of the year for me, and I'm not complaining at all. Alhamdulillah, it's all been very fulfilling, but I really need to slow down so I can offer you, inshallah, the best content possible. So I hope you will understand, and that you won't be mad at me that there won't be an episode next week, but inshallah we'll be back in 2024. Now that I've shared with you these little announcements, let's get into the episode. And today I am having a conversation with Alizar, who is the founder of Ruuq, the first hijab bodysuit brand. And you guys, if you don't laugh listening to this episode, then there's a problem. Because you are going to hear me laugh a lot. Alizar is just as witty and funny as you would expect her to be and as she is on social media. And if you don't know her already, you are surely going to love her as much as I do. So in today's episode, we are discussing her journey as a revert. And what I thought was very interesting here is that Alizar comes from an Arab background, which means she not only had to go through everything a convert usually goes through when they decide to embrace Islam, she also had to face the judgment of Arab Muslims and the Ummah. And I just was so curious to know how she navigated everything, to know how she came back to Islam, and what would be her pieces of advice to people who are thinking about it, but also to people who are exposed to converts and reverts, and how to make them feel safe and welcomed in the Ummah. So I hope you'll enjoy this really funny, real, and sincere conversation with Alizar. And yeah, let's get into it. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you're doing well, inshallah. Today we're back for a new episode with someone very special. We've been following each other again for a very long time because I wanted to have on the podcast people that I trust, people that I love, and people that inspire me. And the lady that I have today fits all those cases. So let's say welcome and salam to Alizar. Salam alaikum, Alizar. How are you doing?
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. You have embarrassed me.
No, of course. I mean,
Alhamdulillah, doing great.
don't say that. I mean,
In Arabic, we say خجلتيني.
I understand a little Arabic, although we have different dialects, but this I understand.
Okay.
uh,
No, that is so sweet of you, Habibti. Thank you so much.
Thank you for accepting to be on this special episode. There are a few ones that really have my heart. And when we're talking about coming back to Islam or discovering Islam, converting, reverting, always hits differently. So I'm really excited about having this chat with you today. But before we get started, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit.
Salam alaikum once again, everyone. My name is Alizar Tawil. I am the CEO and founder of Ruuq, which is a modest wear brand here out of Jordan. Um, I'm also a married mother of three boys, specifically. So there's
MashaAllah.
no shortage of excitement over on my end, alhamdulillah. And then something that people are always surprised to find out is that I am indeed a revert, which is not instinctive because I am Arab. But yes, alhamdulillah, I've been Muslim for a long time now. I guess you could say since maybe 2004, 2005. And it's been an interesting journey. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. One reason why well, I should give a little bit of context because at first this episode was supposed to be recorded with our friend Rachel, who you might know as Mamin Amen on Instagram and YouTube. And the reason why I wanted to have you both is because Rachel converted to Islam, but she's not Arab. And the reason why I
Hmm.
really wanted to have you on the podcast is because you're Arab, you're familiar with
Hmm.
Islam, and yet you
Hmm.
haven't been Muslim your whole life. So this is going to be a super interesting conversation, inshallah. And I feel like a lot of
Inshallah.
people are going to learn a lot of things. So let's get started with a very simple question. At what age did you go back to Islam? And what did your life look like before all of this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman rahim. So I think it's hard to say exactly when the switch happened, even though I did have the aha moment where I made my shahada. But right now, it's been so long that it's a bit of a blur. But I believe I was probably either 20 or 21 years old when I took my shahada. And prior to that, I think you could describe me as a very spiritual person. So, um, interestingly enough, I didn't grow up with a religion in specific. We were a very secular household. We are, my family is originally Druze, which is like a far off sect of Islam. But again, we grew up in a house that didn't necessarily follow by any religious rules, but we had spiritual principles, if that makes sense. So for me, I grew up always with an awareness of the creator, and that, obviously this whole world didn't just come into existence by itself. And I believed and was raised to believe that you should be a good person and you should treat everybody the way that you're treated. And just like these very fundamental values that I think, extend for everybody of all places. And this is basically the backdrop of where I came from um, before I started exploring, what Islam even is.
And one thing, if I remember correctly, you're from a double culture, right?
Yes. So that's another thing that it's quite the story when when people ask, because while yes, I am, my heritage is Lebanese, and I my whole family is Lebanese. I was born in Venezuela, South America. So my mother is first generation Lebanese in Venezuela. So she was born and raised there. And then my father, who's Lebanese, born and raised in Lebanon, met my mother in Venezuela on a chance trip to go visit his aunt, who also happened to live there. And subhanAllah, the rest is history. So I was born there as well. And my first language is actually Spanish. So that's another interesting bit that I think a lot of people always find surprising. And it's funny because that actually also had an impact on my worldview, because in Venezuela, the predominant religion is Catholicism. So for us, we're very much accustomed, to hearing the church bells. We used to go visit certain churches to, offer prayers. Again, it wasn't necessarily, how can I put it? Um, it wasn't religious, but you feel like there's this spiritual connection, right? And you want to have this thing with the divine. And you look around you and you see what others are doing, and something about it just appeals you, because there is this peace that comes from watching people devout in their faith, right? And so I always had that growing up, and I still remember like my earliest memories going to certain churches to offer prayers, and make promises that should something happen, you're going to donate or you're going to do XYZ. And yeah, so this was kind of like the context as well that was surrounding me from early on. And not to mention also we had like a plethora of family friends from all sorts of backgrounds and faiths. So for me, like, dabbling and understanding people's perspectives of their faiths and whatnot was always very fascinating from early on.
I feel like this is something we see a lot with people that converted, reverted to Islam, is that they were exposed to different religion. Like, obviously there are atheist people that decide to convert and
Mhm.
like really bond with Islam. But what I find interesting is when you've been exposed to other beliefs and you decide that Islam is going to be the one that you're going to follow because it makes more sense. Personally, I have always been Muslim, but I went to Catholic school from like the age of 12 to the age of 18, and I was the only Muslim, or at least practicing Muslim. And so we had to go to church every Wednesday, and it was
Mhm.
very interesting to
Allah.
see the things that are in common, especially when it comes to like the monotheist religions, the bigger ones that we all know. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, it's so important to actually know about other beliefs, so you get even more comfort from your own. And actually, even maybe for you, I don't know, you can tell me, but maybe it will just reinforce your choice to follow Islam because you know how other religions work, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, I think I grew, like you said, that deep appreciation from Islam because of what I was already exposed to. And basically, Islam just bridged those gaps of understanding that I had a difficult time with other faiths. And I always describe it to people like Islam is nothing new. It is a very what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's a very instinctive faith in that it just makes sense, right? Like, you don't need to do too many mental gymnastics to understand it. You know what I mean? And so I felt like a lot of these other ways of life that I was exposed to, they were they were beautiful in principle, but when you got down to the nitty-gritty, that's where you would sort of have some skepticism about, like, okay, but does that really make sense? Like, can you truly in your heart, like, be okay with that line of reasoning, let's say? Whereas with Islam, like, whenever you question it, you can get a pretty clear
Exactly.
cut answer. So at least, again, this has been my experience. And I think what was so beautiful is, like I said, it's nothing new, and it really felt just like a continuation of the same message that has always been brought down to the
SubhanAllah.
people, right? Except that it just cleared up whatever misconceptions or ideas got lost in the process. So, and obviously in the context that we're in now, so we are currently witnessing the horrors of what is going on in Palestine. um, to see how many people, for example, are starting to explore Islam and being surprised by how much similarities they already have. Subhanallah, like, for me, like, where I have even like non-Muslim relatives asking me about it, and that's just so beautiful to me, because it goes to show that, like, there's something about this that is just so easy, to
Yeah.
understand, and it just so comforting, right? And
Alhamdulillah,
alhamdulillah.
subhanallah. I thought about the exact same thing when you were talking. It was like, especially with everything going on, we see so many
Mhm.
non-Muslims being curious because they were like, I can't understand the amount of faith that Palestinians have? Like, what is this? What is this? And a lot of people say, well, I mean, that's Islam for you.
Surprise.
Yeah. And then they start reading the Quran and they realize that everything they thought Islam was, it actually wasn't. And
Hmm.
then they decide to learn more and everything, which makes me think, was there a point before you officially became Muslim when you had bad thoughts about Islam? Because you grew up in a secular family, which means that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't fast during Ramadan or you didn't do salah every day. None of this, right?
Nothing. Like, we, again, just we literally celebrate with everybody without, doing any of the hard stuff. So forget fasting, forget any of that. Um so just, wandering around this world. But it's interesting because, and I hate to say this, but I actually had more negative experiences with Muslims prior to becoming Muslim myself, which I
Yeah.
think did not help initially. And this, I'm going to end up calling out the Ummah on this one, because as someone who was on the other side, I used to have like this sense of superiority from Muslims, when they'd find out that you weren't Muslim, and they kind of look down on you, which used to irk me a lot, growing up. Whenever I'd experience like those instances, like I will never forget. I had this one time, we were at our local swimming pool, and I was speaking to my mother in Arabic, and then this little girl, she swims up to us and she's like, "Oh, بتحكوا عربي? Like, you speak Arabic?" We're like, "Yeah, we speak Arabic." It's like, "Are you Muslim?" And we're like, "No, we're not." And she's like, "Oh," and then she swam away. See, those situations leave such a bad taste in your mouth,
Yeah.
and you carry them for a long time, right? Like, I still remember that ick feeling that I got from that incident. And that was not even the first. Like, I've had other situations like that. And which is why I really encourage like my Muslim brothers and sisters to be very careful with how you interact with other people, because you as a person are a walking representation of this faith. And whenever you behave in a way that is contrary to this faith, you are doing the faith a disservice, because our faith is beautiful. And it's a shame for you to let your own shortcomings tarnish this faith. So, for me, uh, so that was my impression, let's say, of Islam beforehand. And I used to think like, these people, they think they're better than everybody else, like they have their one-way ticket to Jannah. Like, so again, it wasn't positive. Let's just put it that way. It gets worse. So I'm keeping it tame right now. But I remember the first time I started even thinking about Islam again was post 9/11, and I very vividly remember when I found out about 9/11. And I think everybody who was around at that time and had, some sort of
Yeah.
self-awareness knows exactly where they were. And I remember I was in like my art class, grade 12, and one of our classmates like busts through the door and says, "The twin towers have been hit." And then basically the whole day just froze. And we brought in a television and we were watching live, and we were all glued to the TV the entire day. And at night, like, even I got home, I was again watching the news. I was even doing my homework in front of the TV, just, watching this. And I remember where they started talking about Islam, and they started saying something about like, oh, they believe in this deity called Allah, and something about the moon. And when he was saying that, like when the anchor person was saying that, in my mind I was like, bro, what are you on? Allah's just Arabic for God, right? And again, I could say this as a, like, even our Christian Arab friends say Allah. It's
Yes.
written in their
Yes.
Bibles. It says Allah in Arabic. So that was the first time where I actually hit pause and I was like, hold up, something's not right here. Like, why is he trying to make it seem like Muslims believe in something weird? Like, Allah is like this unique moon god, right? So, astaghfirullah al-azim. But you know what I mean? So, for me, that was
I was
probably
saying,
the
I
first
was
time.
thinking that's shirk.
Like, bro, so for me, that's when you could say that the light first came on, and I started, seeing, like, I feel like there's something very deliberate in the way that they're talking about this faith to make this group look like there's something alien, right?
Yeah.
um but that's as far as it got. So I became pretty defensive about Islam, in the sense that I don't want people to be, insulting this entire group of humans, right? Who have this faith, and their faith is, like, at the end of the day, they believe in a creator, they believe in a higher power. It's very straightforward, right? So that's as far as it got. So for me, that was, again, lurking in the back of my mind. So we're living in now this post 9/11 world, and then you start hearing all of these terrible associations, and people start pinning Islam with terrorism, with Arab, with this and that. And as an Arab person myself, like, it's, you can't miss this, right? And it just made me even more critical about the stuff that I was hearing in the news, and just watching how unjust people were being towards this entire group of people, right? So that's basically the backdrop of just before I started exploring Islam more deeply.
So you told me that seeing all this injustice post 911 just
Mhm.
really 9/11, not
I got
911,
you.
9/11, um really made you think about Islam in a way that was like, it's so unfair, like so many people follow that religion and a lot of people seem to be completely fine. It's just not fair. What was the one thing that made you think, I actually want to learn more about it as a practice and like as a way of
Mhm.
life, as you were saying?
So enter my now husband. And I know how people are going to be like, "Oh, okay, she converted for her man." No, hear me out.
Yeah, I mean,
So
to be honest, most people that are going to listen to the podcast are Muslims. I'm sure there will be
Mhm.
non-Muslim as well
Yeah.
that hopefully don't have that idea.
Mhm.
But I know a lot of non-Muslims are
Yes.
like, oh yeah, she converted for a man.
My family included. So so let's start from there. So for me, it's interesting because I was not looking to get married. And I grew up being told that if the day I decide I want to get married, it has to be an Arab boy. And my family's request was, it doesn't matter what his religion is, as long as he's an Arab boy, that's what we care about. Because again, as a secular family, we care about our culture, our traditions, the food, etc. So my family just wants someone who speaks the same language. So that was the criteria. And I was a good child. I did not disobey my parents. I don't have any crazy stories. The worst I ever did was go to the mall when my mom told me don't go to the mall, and then my friend tried to steal something and I felt so bad, and that was that. Okay? Like, that was my first lesson in Allah is watching. And you cannot hide anything from him. So that's like the extent of my rebellion growing up. So when I was in second year university, I remember I had a friend who kept insisting that I meet this guy because she thought that we would make a really good pair. Again, similar interests and whatnot. And as someone who never dabbled in dating, because I quite literally did not want to deal with, like, fighting my family over this. I was like, girl, I don't got time for that. Please just let me focus on my studies. She kept insisting for 3 months that I need to meet this person. So eventually, just the stars aligned, as they say, and or in we would say nasib, the fate. Uh, had it that it was exam season and everything was lazy, and there wasn't many things going on campus, and she happened to be in the same classroom with him that I was the hour prior. So literally, I would finish my psychology class, and then her class would come in, and then he shared that class with her, and they were in like the same mentor group or whatever. And so she's like, one day on my way out of my class, I would always see her coming back. We used to live in the same house. She's like, okay, he's in this class with me, why don't you just stay instead of going home, and then I'll introduce you. And again, because it really required no effort on my part, I said okay. So one day, as planned, my class was over, and rather than get up and go home, I literally just stayed in my spot. And then she came into class, and then eventually he came into class, and she pointed him out and said, "Okay, that's the dude." And for those of you who are single, it was not any kind of like, wow, stars. And no, it was very basic, like, oh, okay, it's nothing special. So just this is to let you know that there's no such thing as like, you start seeing stars and like the world stops. It was a very,
Does your husband know that you you didn't feel like it was special?
I've said this story in front of him thousands of times to other people, so he's well aware. And I'm sure, and it was vice versa. Like, I'm just some person, right? So, and mind you, this was during Canadian winter, so the amount of layers and hats, and I might as well been in a burqa, because like like that's what it was like. So, anyways, so yeah, my friend points him out, and she's like, "That's the guy," and I was like, "Okay, that's cool." Um, and then what? What do you do, right? So, subhanallah, because I feel like this is an interesting part of the story. The class that she happened to share with him was an anthropology class called Death and Dying, of all things. Okay, so not morbid at all. And then, subhanallah,
Very, very romantic.
very right. But but it goes to show you, subhanallah, that day they happened to be discussing death and dying in Islam. So the premise of the class, as
Subhanallah.
an anthropology class, is that they explore how death is seen in different cultures, and that day happened to be Islam. So, subhanallah, right?
Subhanallah.
And the professor happened to ask, like, "Oh, is there anybody in the class who knows how to write Arabic?" And guess who puts up their hand? Homeboy. So he puts up his hand, and then she calls him to the front of the class because I needed a better view apparently. So, so he goes on, and she tells him, start writing this and that, and he's writing, and I'm like, okay, okay. But again, nothing special. But I just thought it was funny how the coincidence that of all days I show up during this class, and then he ends up going to the front of the class. So after that, I felt awkward, as you can imagine. And I told my friend, like, I don't, what do people do? She's like, it's okay. I'll just introduce you. You're my friend, and you're Arab, and you don't know other Arab people. Like, that is the worst excuse I've ever heard, but okay.
Really?
So, like, really. Because she knew my parents' requirements, right? Because even when I told her, get off my case, she's like, don't worry, I did my research. He's Arab. So I was like,
She's
okay,
a good
we
friend.
got that out of the way. My friend, yeah, wing girl, like I'm telling you. So I'm still friends with her to this day. God bless her. Um, anyways, long story short, we exchanged emails, and this was during the days of like MSN Messenger, and we just chatted. I know this is not halal for those of you out there, but this is the way things
I
unfolded.
love how we have to do
Um,
that disclaimer, but people don't always understand how it works. Not how it works, but how it's trickier in the West, I
Yes,
would
for
say.
sure. Because and again, we did not. I mean, my mother again met my father, and they had a chaperone. And then in my case, it was almost the same thing. So we started chatting online, and eventually, when we decided to start, meeting in person, we already had this understanding between the two of us that like we just want to see if this has potential. Again, we would meet in public spaces, in the student center, and we would have coffee. Again, some people might argue with this, but that's the story, and may Allah forgive us during our ignorance. But like 1 month after starting to see each other in person, we kind of agreed that yes, we want to get engaged because we know that there's no such thing as dating, right? But we wanted to just make sure that like we were kind of on the same level. And so once we made the decision to get engaged, sorry, go ahead.
He was aware that you were not Muslim at that point,
Yeah. So he knew. I mean, we discussed like our
and
backgrounds.
he was okay with it.
This is where it gets interesting
Okay.
because when we understood that we wanted to get engaged, we started having these conversations about the future, right? Like, what would our life look like? And from then, he told me, listen, I understand that you're not Muslim, but I accept you the way that you are. Or, sorry, and I accept you the way that you are. The only thing is that, inshallah, once we have children, I want to raise them as Muslims. And so for me, as someone who grew up, without really any kind of customs in that respect, I couldn't really argue. I told him, okay, fair enough. But that was the spark that led me to start asking questions about Islam, because I figured, okay, well, if I'm agreeing to this, I would like to know what I'm getting into. And so this is where the questioning, the Inquisition began. So I figured, okay, well, since you're the one who brought this up, let me ask you, right? And cue every single misconception you could possibly imagine about Islam being thrown this man's way.
Like what?
Everything, everything. So, like, okay, the earliest question I remember, it's like, yeah, you guys, you do this whole Ramadan thing and you say that you fast because you want to like empathize with the poor. But then at the end of the day, y'all pig out. And I said it just like that. Okay. So I don't understand. That completely defeats the purpose. So I can say that because I'm Muslim now, right? But like that, like,
You haven't changed at all.
I, nothing. So for me, like going into so when I think about it now, I'm like, I am surprised this man did not like tell me off. Let's just put it at that, right? Because I was so offensive with my questions, like no holds barred, right? So like, and I would just throw him questions like that, right? And alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, and God bless him. What I appreciated so much, even as offensive as I was with my questions, never once did he get upset. And whenever and when he had an answer, he would give me the answer, and it was very logical, very rational. And I'd be like, okay, fair enough. And I would leave it. But then when he didn't know the question, and this is the key, or sorry, when he didn't know the answer, and this is the key part that I hope so many others will take from it, he would genuinely tell me, you know what? I don't know. And I had so much respect for that. And it made me want to genuinely listen to what he had to say, because I could tell that it was sincere and he wasn't trying to just say something for the sake of convincing me. He genuinely didn't know. And when we met, obviously, like he was like your typical Muslim boy in the West, which is Muslim mostly during Ramadan and on Jumas, right? So,
Oh, that is interesting.
alhamdulillah.
That's interesting, actually. I
Mhm,
feel like most convert that I talk to, usually the guys that
mhm.
they end up falling in love with, they're, well, they're not like super pious, but they still like
Yeah,
have a sense of practice.
yeah. So I mean, there's bits and pieces of it, right? So nothing
Yeah.
perfect, but there's still a connection. So
Yeah, and also enough to ask you to raise your kids in Islam. So that means that it was still kind of important for him.
100%. So for
Yeah.
me, whenever he would go and then come back with an answer, I would just be quiet because like, okay, that makes sense, right? Like for another question, like I would ask him, you guys, you keep talking about like good deeds and bad deeds as if it's some kind of basketball game and you're trying to rack up points, right? So, like, what is this, right? And so, like, I laugh about it now because it feels like that sometimes, right? Well, the way people talk. But then, he would be like, okay, it's not that simple, right? I mean, it's just for
Yeah.
certain types of people, it helps with them trying to understand how the system works. So, but again, it was those kinds of very blunt questions that were being thrown his way. So bless him, mashallah. And like I said, so he would eventually it got to the point where I ran out of questions to ask. Like I was satisfied with the answers that he gave, and that's when my own curiosity was sparked because I figured, you know what, this is making a lot of sense. I can see how all encompassing this is in terms of like how to live your life. And I just
Yeah.
started to read on my own. So I remember, buying a Quran, starting to read it, feeling, very curious about like the way the Quran was written because it doesn't read like a regular book. So those were like some of my initial thoughts.
Did you read it in Arabic or in English?
English, my Arabic is at a KG2 reading level right now. And I can tell you that with certainty because my 6 year old and I, or almost 6 year old, we're at same reading level in Arabic right now. So I read to him to
That
learn.
makes me That's good because I'm in the same situation and I always feel guilty. I feel like I don't have any excuse when Arabic is the language of Algeria and the language of the Quran. And
Mhm.
I'm so slow. I read so slowly and I'm just not good.
It's painful. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
Like I feel so bad when I get frustrated with my children trying to read, because I now understand how painful it is to try to read and you're not fluent. And it
Yeah.
doesn't help when my husband passes by and then he hears me trying and he starts snickering to himself. I'm like, listen, I'm trying. So,
But it's good
but
that,
alhamdulillah.
yeah, alhamdulillah, it's good that we're saying that because I think every time I talked with people thinking about converting or newly converts, they're like, Arabic is so hard. Do I need to learn Arabic? Do I need to read Arabic? I'm like, you guys, even people that are born in Arab cultures do not know how to speak Arabic or to read Arabic. So just try your best. Try your best.
The more I started diving into it, just the more I understood and became convinced that there is no way this book could have come from a human being. Because for me, I think, as someone who was studying the sciences, and I mentioned this in the sense, like, I'm very much about things being logical and easy to understand. I feel like the more complicated you make it, the less likely it is to be true. So for me, like, just all of the scientific signs in the Quran was very impressive to me. And if I had to give you like my aha moment, it came when I was learning about Surah Al-Alaq. So the surah of the clot, or the thing that hangs. And there was this verse that, people were saying how, like, the miracles with psychology, and what sorry, not psychology, neuropsychology and neuroscience. Um, and when the stars align, subhanallah, I before I came across the piece of evidence that I'm going to share, I was in my neuropsychology class, and we were learning. And again, in neuropsychology, you learn all about the brain and how it interacts with the rest of your body, and also with your behavior. So this particular verse, it starts from verse. So it's Surah 96, verse 13. And it says, "What if that man persists in denial and turns away? Does he not know that Allah sees all? But no, if he does not desist, we will certainly drag him by the forelock, a lying, sinful forelock." That particular verse is cited as like a miracle in the Quran. Why? So when you look at it, first glance, it kind of reads interesting, because if we're imagining Judgment Day and then Allah is going to bring up all of the people who were sinful, or who didn't listen to him, or like turned away from his remembrance, grabbing someone by the forelock, which is like your forehead, does not exactly feel instinctive. Let's put it that way. Like, when you imagine grabbing someone, you think grabbing them by the neck, maybe grabbing them up by the arms, grabbing them upside down by the feet, grabbing them by like the torso. Uh, this feels weird. And it like if someone was writing this, like, who would come up with this, right? Like, it's not natural. Let's just put it that way. It's not
Yeah.
a natural
Yeah.
way to grab someone, right? And then to further qualify it by saying a lying, sinful forelock. So what does lying and sinful have anything to do with, your forehead, right? And then you bring it to neuropsychology, and we all know that your frontal cortex is like the executive of your brain, and this is where all of your decisions are made. So whenever you're trying to plan, whenever you're trying to uh, plan anything, like plan what you're going to do, what you're going to say, what to think, etc., it all runs through this part of your mind. And lying, which is something that you plan, also happens here, and it's also the same place
Subhanallah.
that gets inhibited when you drink. So when you're inebriated, or this is the part that gets shot. That's why you make stupid decisions, because you don't have proper access to this area. So when it says a
Subhanallah.
lying, sinful forelock, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah. So that was the verse that actually made me take shahada. Like, when I read that, I was like, okay, I get it. Like, because I there is no way anyone would have been able to say something so specific and
Subhanallah.
so true at that time. And that's when I realized the miracle of the Quran. And because a
No,
lot of people will tell you, oh, it
no.
was written by a man, but no, no, this is so. And subhanallah, like I'd read about like the actual alaq, like the verses of the embryo and whatnot, but that still you could argue, right? Because oh, maybe dissection, people could figure it out, but this, like, what? How would you ever make that connection, right? So alhamdulillah, like that for me was when I came around and I accepted that this was truly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the rest is history, I guess.
Alhamdulillah. It's
Alhamdulillah.
I love hearing those stories every time because it's very personal, Not everyone has the same shift at the same time
Mm,
or with the same verse. And I never thought about this. And subhanAllah, every time I read the Quran, there's something new that I learned, there's something new that I realize. But every time I'm like, this is not written by a man. This could never be
mhm,
written by a man. It's just the way it's constructed, the way it's written, it's special. And even if you are struggling to read it, when you just listen to it, there's just something special about it.
mhm.
It's, I don't know, subhanallah,
Subhanallah.
subhanallah.
For sure. And we really don't appreciate it as much as we should.
Yes.
I can tell you that. Like, we forget how miraculous this book is.
Yeah.
And subhanallah, times like this right now, it motivates you to pick it up and try to dig deep once again. And it's incredible also how, regardless of what's going on in your life, if you just randomly open it up and pick a verse, it will have some relation to whatever it is you're going through. Like,
Subhanallah.
you will be able to find a way that it's connected to whatever you're going through right now. It's incredible in that respect.
Subhanallah.
That there's always knowledge that you can attain from even the littlest of verses.
Yeah.
So alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us, and I always pray that I never lose that sense of awe from His word.
It's so important. I think this is something that we need to maintain as well. It's like you're watering a plant, your faith is truly, your
Mm,
iman is truly like a plant that you want to keep growing and see blossoming. So I think that's something very important. One thing that I was thinking about was oh, I lost it. Wait. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I remember. um
go for it.
one of the content creators that really got interested in the Quran since everything going on was telling a story where she was watching a live of someone talking about it, and then she saw that he started reciting like without reading anything, and then she was surprised. She was
Mm.
like, wait, do you guys memorize those surah? And then people said some people know the whole Quran, and she was blown away. She was like, you guys memorize a whole book? And then people were like, but that's not just a book, that's the thing, no one would just.
When you put it that way, sorry to interrupt you. When you put it that way, yeah, who memorizes a whole book, right?
That's something
That's a good point.
that's one thing. And even when you just think about Surah Al-Baqarah, it's like you would be able to
Mm.
talk for 2 hours straight and recite it as a normal thing, subhanallah. And I really think that this is very specific to the Quran. One thing that I wanted to ask you was, when you took that plunge, when you
Mhm,
finally said, okay, like took your shahada and were officially Muslim, mashallah, what
mhm,
were the things that like you found most challenging, and what were the things that, contrariwise, you thought were like
mhm.
came naturally to you?
Fasting was the easiest. I don't know why.
Really?
Fasting was so easy. I was able to fast, but I still wasn't praying. Like, that's where I was at. So, for me, if the hardest I would say is salah, and to make salah like such a routine part of your day to day. That was hard because you are inconveniencing yourself when you pray, because you have to stop whatever it is you're doing or wake yourself from the middle of your sleep in order to take part in this action. Whereas fasting, it's you not doing something, which, it's easier
Yeah.
to not do something than to have to do something. So not eating,
I never thought about this that way, but that is so true.
yeah. So I mean, like, I don't have to eat. Okay, I just avoid food. Whereas the idea of like making wudu and like finding a place to make wudu and then finding a place to go pray, especially if you're out and about during the day, that's that's challenging, right? I mean, especially if you live in the West. Here in Jordan, like, I mean, any mall has a salah room and they have like a nice wudu
Yeah.
station. It's not that complicated, but in the West, it's not that easy. And you dread people finding you praying. Like, even if you, like, for example, in
Yeah.
university, if you like want to sneak off in the library, find a little corner to offer your salah, you're terrified that someone will like randomly pass by you and be like, right? So it's just weird, right?
Yeah, you can't do that in France. Some people do it, but here, if you do that, some people are going to report you for sure.
There you go. So again, like, people have had to find broom closets to offer their salah so that they don't get.
Yeah.
So you can imagine like that. It's if it's not something that you're accustomed to, it is difficult to make it a habit. Let's put it that way. And like anything, it's a muscle that you just need to exercise until eventually it becomes so natural that you don't even think about it anymore. So I remember before, um, the way I would see salah again. I never saw it in a negative way, but like I I inconvenience would be probably the best way to describe it, because like it just cuts up at different points of your day. Whereas
Yeah.
once salah has become a habit, you start planning your day around the salah. So whenever I want to go see someone, for example, I'll be like, okay,
Yeah.
I think it's better if I see them after Maghrib, because then Isha, I can always make it up when I come back. But if I leave at like Asr time, then it makes Maghrib, then I might miss Maghrib. You know what? Like, these are calculations. This is Muslim math. If we're gonna, this is Muslim math that you start making um, when you're in that stage, to make sure that you're not missing anything, and that you're always ready. This is the Muslim math that you start doing once salah has become like a non-negotiable part of your day. So, and alhamdulillah, it's not something that happens overnight. And like I said, as with anything, it's a habit that you build until eventually it just becomes a staple.
Subhanallah. Yeah, I think in the episode about Salah, we mentioned the exact same things. I don't think
Mhm,
Salah, although it is probably, well, it is the second most important pillar of Islam. And you build
mhm.
your iman and hope to reach ihsan thanks to this base that you have and that is like allowed by the five pillars.
Yeah, it takes time, but you can get there, right? As long as you have that intention, right, that you want to get better at it, and you don't
Yeah.
remain satisfied with just doing like the bare minimum or last minute or whatnot. Like, I would say, me currently, I'm at a stage where now I'm trying my best to offer all the extra prayers. Whereas if you'd asked me like maybe 2 years ago, I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, I barely have enough time for them, especially when I worked full time out of my house. Now it's like, what excuse do you have? You're literally home, right? So why not?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially now with the situation, it
That is so
reminds me,
true.
like, if anything, that you need to be praying more, right? So, but again, if you ask this to past Alizar, uh, that's much, but now it's different. So we're all at different levels, or at different stages of our Islam. Let's put it that way. And the wonderful thing is, as long as, like I said, you have that intention to just continuously improve, before you know it, you're a completely different person.
I have one question. How far into converting did you decide to wear hijab? Like, how many years or like months was it after you took your
Mhm.
shahada? Because one question that I often get from people thinking about converting or who just convert is like, do I have to wear hijab now? It's
Mm.
just such a huge step. I want to wear it, but also like I have to deal with everything that comes with converting. So, when did you decide to wear it?
Um, I started, or I was convinced to wear it when I was pregnant with my first child. So I'd already been married, I think, like, I mean, I'd known my husband already for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. And then we gotten married. And again, and when I got married, I literally never imagined I would wear hijab. I'm telling you, like, one of the conditions about for me marrying my husband, I promised that I would never wear hijab.
Subhanallah.
Because in my mind, I was like, that's
You
crazy.
plan
Like,
and Allah plans.
me, of all people, I'm telling you, I am like the poster child for you plan and Allah plans. Because I mean, I spent my honeymoon on a beach wearing a very revealing piece of clothing. Let's put it that way. So when like when I was told that, I was like, what a ridiculous thing to say, right? Like it was unfathomable to me that I would even contemplate hijab, and here we are. So, but at the time, I remember when I was, again, subhanallah, something about being pregnant and like just makes you contemplate life more deeply. Um, and I guess that had opened up my heart to learn more about what does hijab mean, right? Or what is modesty in general. And just the more I read, the more it started to make sense that, like I grew up in a very superficial society, let's put it that way, where there's so much emphasis on the way you look and how you present yourself, and your intellect is like put to the back, right? Like nobody cares about how smart you are, people care about how good you look. And I think for me, what was very powerful was this idea of like the hijab being used to remove that distraction so that people can actually hear you and appreciate you for who you are, not what you look like. So that's probably the bit about hijab that resonated with me the most, given my context. And when that dawned on me, um, I realized, you know what, I think I get it. I understand, and I think this is the right thing to do. But between me understanding and being convinced and me executing was quite a distance because I had all of this. For in my case, because I had made that promise to my family that I would never wear hijab, and then the thought of me defying my family was a thought that was just so great that I just couldn't bring myself to confronting them in that respect. But the aha moment for me was I had already had my son at this point, and I was going through this thought process of like, if I were to walk out the door and get hit by a bus, God forbid, and then I have to stand before my Lord and I have to explain myself when he asks me, he's like, okay, so hijab, what's up with that? And I say, oh, I understand. I was convinced, but I was just afraid of my family and what would happen. And then I imagine that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala would reply something to the effect of, "So you were afraid of your family, but you weren't afraid of me." And then that one hit me like a ton of bricks. So,
That gave me chills. I've been through the same process, and
oh,
that still gives me chills.
yeah, like it gave me chills again right now. So I was like, "Oh, that is a terrible answer," right? So
Yeah,
I was, yeah, I couldn't. And that's when I started feeling that sense of urgency that, because if I wasn't convinced, that's a whole different story. And obviously you'll be judged according to wherever you were mentally. That's why I say that
yeah,
intention is so important. Like in my case,
yeah,
I was convinced that it's the right thing, but I wasn't doing it because I had a fear of man instead of a fear of God.
yeah,
So like that was unacceptable. And I knew that that would not go down well should I meet my creator anytime soon. So
yeah.
so that's when I basically just put a deadline for myself. I happened to get into grad school, and I said on my first day of grad school, that'll be the first day I wear my hijab, and that's what I did. So for me, I remember, alhamdulillah, I
Alhamdulillah.
would drop off my son, who was I think a year old at the time. I would drop him off at my parents because they would look after him, and then I would head downtown to my class, and then on my way I would put on my hijab. And then I'd walk into university with hijab. And then when I'd come back to pick up my son, I would take it back off. So I did this for about a semester. I would leave, wear hijab, come back. It was the opposite of what every Muslim girl does in the West. Because our friends were infamous for they walk out of their house with hijab and then it comes off in school. Right? So people would laugh at me because they're like, that's not usually how it works. But okay. So so in my case, I did that for about a whole semester. But then alhamdulillah, winter came around, and like I told you, winters in Canada, everybody is basically in hijab burqa because like it is cold. So it became really
Yeah.
easy because then instead of wearing like a hijab, I could just wear winter hats. And I was very well known for owning like 20 hats. So I wore them all the time and no one said anything because that's just the way I dressed during the winter time. The issue became during the spring where the snow melted, the flowers were blooming, and I'm still dressed as if it's 40 degrees outside. So eventually I was confronted, and that's when I couldn't deny it anymore because that I was they looked at me and they're like, so that's not coming off, is it? And nope, I don't think it
It's
is.
not.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it was pretty rough, I will admit, during that period of time because again, it's a very sensitive subject, and I got a lot of backlash from my family. I was, my family threatened to disown me as a result because for them it wasn't so much what I chose to practice as much as what I was projecting to the world. And as someone who grew up in a secular home, and if you're aware, like the civil war in Lebanon, there was a huge component that had to do with like religious differences. So it was almost like being a flag bearer, right? And you are somehow advertising to the world what you believe and that you're somehow better than everybody else. So that was the connotation behind it. Whereas other people in my family were like, "Oh, your beauty, we can no longer see it." So it was more superficial. But it was uh, the symbolic reason that made it such a controversy in the family. So and then cue everyone blaming my husband, thinking that he brainwashed me and forced it upon me. Which again, it's a very common trope in Arab culture, especially when there's like interfaith marriages. So
Yeah.
I guess I should have expected it, but it still hurt nonetheless because I grew up in a very close family, and like I mentioned, I never defied my parents ever. So that was huge for me, right? And it's interesting because I don't know why I remembered now, but like part of the reason why I named my son Musa is because of the story of Sayyidina Musa, where I think it's in the
Alayhi
surah
salam.
of alayhi salam. It was in the surah of the poets, where basically Pharaoh he confronts him and he's like, didn't we raise you and we took care of you and now you're doing this? And so I kind of like saw my story in him, where I grew up like pampered and loved, and now I'm going and doing something and I'm defying my loved ones, right? So it was part of the reason why I gravitated to the name as well. Um, so so yeah, it took time for things to turn around, but I realized that after I had my child, and I don't know, at one point I this sort of dawned on me, and you know I was able to put myself in their shoes and think like, like all of this hate wasn't actually hate, it was actually fear that was coming out. But it seems like hate and it seems like anger because think about it. If you raise your child and you sacrifice so much for this child, and then they grow up and then they become something completely foreign to you, right? That's scary, right? Like all of this time and energy and love that you poured into this child, and then all of a sudden it feels like they want to dissociate from you, like everything you did for them wasn't good enough and now they chose this other way of life, right? And and you fear that like they want nothing to do with you, right? Because you're no longer the same in that particular aspect. So When I came to that realization is when I stopped taking it personally, and I was able to see it from like their perspective, even though they hadn't voiced it like that. But again, I studied psychology, so it helped. So I was able to understand like where they were coming from, and I imagined myself like, okay, well now I'm raising my child in this particular way, and I hope that they remain Muslim. But Allahu alam, God knows what happens in the future. So I started to approach the situation with compassion. Um, and I made efforts to always flip the script. So whenever I felt that the conversation was going to start going downwards, for the longest time, by the way, the subject of hair was a trigger for me. If we ever started talking about hair like with my family, I would start feeling the onset of a panic attack because I knew that this would devolve into a very ugly, heated conversation. And I didn't want to deal with it. So like
Yeah.
I would always just change the subject, right? And like or walk away and pretend like I got busy with something else because I did not I knew where it was going. So and then I was like, why am I running away from it? Why don't I just make fun of it, right? So for example, without going into details, rain is not our friend. And whenever you go out, like that's always a problem, right? Bad hair days. So one day it was raining, and then I think my mom was saying like, oh no, I just blow dried my hair, it's gonna be, and I was like, haha, at least I don't have to worry about any bad hair day, right? So I started like taking charge of my own story, right? And they would laugh, right? It's like, well, yeah, that's true. That's an advantage. And it was just like little digs here and there, um, is what slowly started making me become more comfortable and okay with expressing or like having discussions around this. Or, for example, I would be told, like, oh, we want to go to visit our family in Venezuela, right? And in Venezuela, like, every outing revolves around the beach, and they're like, oh, but I don't know what the point of you going would be, since it's not like you're going to go in the pool, or it's not like you're going to swim. I told her, you could always tell them I'm wearing scuba gear. Like, what is the problem? Just make something up, right? So just again, cracking jokes here and there. Eventually it became easier, uh and that's sort of how eventually like we overcame that obstacle, because I was able to show them that, listen, yes, I may be dressed more, but that's the extent of it. My relationship with you has not changed. And I will still love you, and I will still care
Yeah.
for you and serve
Yeah.
you as long as it's within the limits of what I can do. Um, that part won't change. And so we went from a situation of potentially being disowned, okay, to my family being the ones who invested in my hijab business. So it's a complete 180 in their opinion the situation. So
Subhanallah.
alhamdulillah, I think
Subhanallah.
we really do need to understand how far compassion can take us in general as Muslims, regardless with who it is that we're interacting. Just take the time to see things from other people's perspective. And like you were saying earlier, give people the benefit of the doubt, for crying out loud. Like, don't jump to conclusions.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that people tend to forget. They think like, oh, well, if I see something wrong, I should call it out. Before you call it out, like, make an excuse, right? Like, come up with anything, but before, like, if it's not so blatant or there's like some gray area, assume the best at the very least, right? And then if you still feel a way about it, you can
Yeah.
always advise them politely on the side and know that you did your part, and whatever the outcome, that's not you, that's between that person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly. I feel like that's beautiful advice for like people thinking about converting that are afraid of their families. I feel like that's often a huge part of it
Hmm.
all, especially when you grew up in the West, even more so maybe when you're not Arab and have zero Muslim people around you, and like your family is Catholic or atheist or whatever, and then you have to come to them. I feel like in France, especially with the current climate, like when people
Hmm.
go and like, yeah, want to convert to Islam, I'm not
Hmm.
blaming those parents to have a little bit of a panic attack and freak out. It's like oh, okay, you decide to join that community that is going through so much and that has so much like misconceptions around it. And you're I feel like I'm not a parent, but I would imagine that as a parent, your first reflex is to protect your child and have like this
Hmm.
need of being like, as you said, it's more motivated by fear, and also maybe a lack of education, because you we are so much exposed to a certain aspect of it all that
Hmm.
isn't even true, that it's easy to just like think this is it, this is how it is. And it requires some personal work to challenge those belief systems and be like, okay, my child is making that decision. I need to set my ego on the side and everything that I've learned and know so far to actually try to understand their decision. But in order for them to do that, it's as you said, we need to be, well, not we, because we are not in that situation, but they, like anyone that is listening and that is going through this, needs to really show compassion and be patient. We can imagine that this isn't easy, obviously. And one question that I have for you, Alisar, was actually, was there a moment through all of this complicated situation with your family where you felt resentment towards Allah, or like you were just questioning your decision, like, oh, this is a lot? Because mentally speaking, I'm imagining that when you're not in good terms with your family, or every time you meet them and those topics come on the table, you just start to not feeling so well. I can only imagine that you might feel like, oh, maybe I did something wrong. It would be natural, if that makes sense, right? So was this something that you felt like happened to you?
Subhanallah, I can genuinely tell you that that was never ever the case. Like, I think if anything, I learned from early on the power of Islam in terms of coping with difficulty. And from day one, like the verse in the Ma'al Usri Yusra uh, has been like a mantra in my head all the time. In the Ma'al Usri Yusra, which is, verily with hardship there is ease. And that has gotten me by every single difficulty up until this day. And if anything, I feel like I trust so much in Allah's plan that I've had some significant uh, things happen to me in the last 3 months, and my attitude was, "It's okay, we'll get through it." And I don't
Yeah.
know, like maybe in the past it would cause me a little bit of a panic. Again, not questioning Allah's wisdom, but naturally you feel anxiety, right? Whenever something is uncertain.
Yeah.
Um, like to give you an example, like financially, I mean, I grew up in a working class home and I saw my parents struggle and they had to support their families back home. And I remember like how much, my parents worked hard to make ends meet and make sure that we didn't have that nothing was missing in our life. And alhamdulillah, like I'm so blessed. Um but I think seeing, for example, my mother, sorry, mom, her anxiety around finances, right? That translated to me. And I also remember like seeing my father at one point, like struggling with feeling frustrated because he couldn't do more. And, that had like a very deep impact on me as a child. And so as an adult, the moment I feel like, are we going to be able to pay the bills, or like, am I going to be able to make this payment or whatever? It induces anxiety. And that went on for years. And then I think even as I became, more devout in Islam, and the idea of putting your trust in Allah, that anxiety would creep in whenever I would feel any kind of instability, right? And then last year, um, I was in a situation where uh, basically a lot of issues happened in the back end of my business, and I ended up running out of cash. So I was done. And I sort of had a moment where I was like, so is this how far I go? Right? Like should I shut down my business now? Because I don't know what to do. And alhamdulillah, I had like the support of my family, and they're like, don't worry, we got you. You just you keep going, okay? whatever overheads you have and whatever, we'll take care of that. You just keep pushing. And I remember at the time, I because a lot of the issues that I was having was with manufacturers, because I had to use like not so great manufacturers because they were the only ones who were willing to make like small quantities for me here locally. But if I wanted to get like the better ones, I needed to put in like a big order, right? So in order for them to take me, I would have to put in like, some of them like minimum 5,000 pieces, which was a lot. Eventually, I managed to bring it down to like 3,000 units, and even then, that was a stretch. And to fund that, I would need about
Yeah.
$25,000. So between materials and whatnot, and it adds up. So I was like, oh my god, where am I going to get $25,000 from, right? And my family was like, don't worry, we'll help you. We'll cover that. So they basically gave me that money to get this thing made, right? And I eventually, out of the blue, I had word that this competition that I entered, I made it to the finals. So in this competition, I was selected to represent like the Levant, or I made it to like the Levant finals, and I competed with like 10 other female entrepreneurs for this competition, and and I won, subhanallah. And then, but I just won the opportunity to make it to the finals. Okay, so the final competition would be like, so this was in, let me remember, this was in, I think, August of last year, and then the final competition would be in December of last year. However, in the middle of it, they decided to have like a Middle Eastern, like a regional type competition. So all of the people who won from the Middle East, we were 5 people, had to compete or we're going to compete just amongst each other. So out of these 5 women, I was one of them. And then we ended up at like it was a competition. It was in Dubai, so they flew me out there, and then we pitched over there. The competition uh, was not planned for. This was something extra. Okay, like it was not in the plans. And first place would get a significant prize. So I pitched, even though I thought I bombed because it was really bad. I was so nervous. Okay.
Hmm.
And subhanAllah, I won first place. And not only did I win first place,
MashaAllah.
the amount that I won was exactly $25,000. So
Subhanallah.
if there was ever a sign to like relax, and like just trust Allah, that was it. And for me, from
Subhanallah.
that day, khalas, like I was, whatever Allah wills, I am ready for it. So it did not escape me that the exact same amount that I needed was the exact same amount that I won. So the
Yeah.
coincidence there was just too much. And alhamdulillah, I, it took me out of the debt that I had incurred from all of the disasters and whatnot. And so when they tell you that, when one door closes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens a window or another door, like believe it. And things come out, you will never anticipate where it will come from. So I think
Yeah.
that was the lesson for me, to just have complete and total trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in His wisdom. And since then, I am a completely changed person. And I,
Yeah.
it's
Subhanallah.
definitely helped, um, solidify that iman. And I pray that insha'Allah it never ever ever wavers. But alhamdulillah,
Insha'Allah.
and as I was saying, like even this year I had something happen, and which could be scary, but I thought, you know what, Allah's done it before, He'll do it again. We'll figure this out. And alhamdulillah.
That is so
Mm.
true. Yeah, alhamdulillah. That notion of tawakkul is so important, and it truly changed the way you go with
Mm.
your life once you decide that, yeah, I shouldn't fear anything, because first of all, this life is worth nothing to Allah, so I don't know why it should be so important
Mhm.
to me. And then he has it all figured out. So I just have to trust him. He chose me to be Muslim, alhamdulillah. So I don't have to worry so much. And it's funny because I feel like financial problems do really make you realize that. And I've been in similar situations where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, and then I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to trust Allah. And then subhanallah, 1 week or two after, the solution came out. I was like, he really always has my back. But one thing that personally really made me realize how important it was to have full trust in him was when my dad got sick, Allah
Allah
yarahmo.
yarhamu.
And I remember, I until his last breath, I was like, Allah is capable of everything. And old me, who like loves her parents deeply and is very close to them, has always thought, if one of my parents die, I'm not sure how I'm going to
Mm,
deal with this. Like, I'm not an anxious person, but this, I'm not sure how I'm going to go through it. And then, the more positive I was, even in the worst moments, the more I started to think, what if my dad dies and then I just get so mad at Allah? And subhanallah, that didn't happen because I had so much trust in him throughout the whole thing. When my dad finally like passed
mm,
away, I was like, you know what, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, like everything went so smoothly. He didn't suffer. He looked beautiful and he smelled good, and alhamdulillah, at least this
alhamdulillah.
is all over. And I never had this thing of like resentment or like being angry for Allah taking my dad away at now. Like, I was the kind of girl. My dad, when he heard that he had cancer, he was like, the first thing he asked his doctor was, am I going to see my daughters getting married?
Mm,
You
mhm,
know? And when he passed away, and I always thought, yeah, my like dad will be here for my wedding and everything, it completely changed my perception of everything. It was like, first of all, I don't even know if I'm gonna get married one day. Insha'Allah, I'm making this dua from the bottom of my
mhm,
heart. But I don't know. And if not, it's okay because Allah knows what is good for me. And subhanAllah, same for this. Like, I never thought, like, if I met the Asya of 5 years ago and I would tell her, Your dad is going to get sick and you're going to lose him," I would have thought, I'm not going to be able to get through
mm,
this. But because I had this trust in Allah that everything is going to be fine and He knows what is best for us, even in those hardships, because as you said, with hardships comes ease, then everything is so much easier and life is goes just so much more
mm.
smoothly. Subhanallah.
Rahmatullah alayh. Subhanallah. It's Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. How
Alhamdulillah.
many times have we said Alhamdulillah in
Mm,
this podcast?
right? And by the way, that's something that non-Muslims also pay attention to. They're like, why do you guys always use all these words? It's like it's again because every aspect of life is something to be, thankful for, right? And we don't realize it, but it always amuses me how the West is always, talking about the latest in meditation and mantras and all of these things. It's like it's built in, right? Like it's we just that's how it is every day. We say Alhamdulillah. We practice gratitude
Yes.
technically at least 17 times a day, at least, right? That's not even including the hamdulillahs you throw in here and there. That's just from the rak'ah in your salah, right? So like, don't be coming to us with like this gratitude. Like
For
we
real.
got it. We about that.
This is so true. I had this conversation with someone not too long ago, and we were like, we understand how personal development books and coaches and everything have earned so much popularity because with the chaos that we're facing in this world, not only about what is currently going on in Palestine, but just generally speaking, from all the natural
Mm,
disasters, climate change, everything that is going on, it's just a lot mentally. And even just society, we're exposed to so much weird things, like with AI, with just if fake
yeah.
news going everywhere. It's a lot. And I understand that people are trying to find a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives, right? And it's
Mm,
always funny how when I read about personal development and everything, I'm like, this was written in the Quran in the most beautiful ways, like thousands of years ago. What are like it's just it's so funny, subhanallah, how they think they came up with something great when this was just
No,
all given to us by Allah.
I like thinking about, like, you know how some people talk about manifesting, and if you think it and believe it. But here's the thing, and so, anybody out there who wants to correct me, please. But in the Quran it says, I am as my slave sees me, right? So if you think of Allah as abundant, then He will be abundant, and if you think
Yes.
that Allah is astaghfirullah, like withholding, then He will withhold, right? So, like, same idea, right? I mean, like, if you believe in
Yeah.
Allah's goodness and that He does intend goodness for you, then you will see goodness, right? So, it we have these concepts embedded in our faith, but maybe in different terms or in different ways. And for us, obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always at the center of everything, right? Whereas people feel it's the universe, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, Allah is above all that.
Yes.
So I always just find it amusing how,
Yeah.
especially, like, as entrepreneurs, you always hear about, like, their routines, and they wake up so early. It's like, yeah, we wake up for Fajr. I mean, that's ingrained in the system. Like, it's part of it. So, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, subhanallah. That's how, subhanallah, and that's something that I hope will come up
Mhm,
with, like, will come up with the podcast. But also, I think with, hopefully, I hope I have been doing this well for the past 3 years and a half. But I've tried to show through the page as well is that through every areas of your life, whether it be from a mental health perspective or a body health perspective, absolutely everything. The
mhm,
approach of Islam is so holistic that it's just when you start to really deeply connect and educate yourself about Islam, then you will never need to look at personal development books and those manifestation theories ever again, because, well,
mhm,
Allah is sufficient to us, honestly. And when you really strengthen that bond to Him, you realize that, okay, I don't need men,
mhm.
especially white men, to tell me what a good life looks like and what a productive life looks like, etc., etc. Where when this message was given to me in the Quran,
Mhm. Definitely. And mind you,
subhanallah.
it's not I want to clarify that it's not that we can just take it as it is. Like, this is obviously
Yes,
after
obviously.
lectures and people explaining it, and then that's how you come to
Yes.
these conclusions. So it may not necessarily jump out at you if you're just reading off on your own, but
Yes.
after you've heard it and then you've seen it from different perspectives, you come to these conclusions, right? There's always space for self-improvement and self-development, but the beautiful thing is that it is embedded in the system, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
if you go to people of knowledge, they can help you see it from that perspective. So the difference is, we don't need, as you said, some white Westerner man telling us that, oh, you should, the perfect morning routine, right? For success, like, we're good, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And the one thing that was thinking about is that, um I think there was a point in my life, alhamdulillah, I've always practiced Islam and felt close to my faith, but objectively speaking, I've been closer to my faith than ever since starting the page and dedicating my whole time to Islam,
MashaAllah.
alhamdulillah. But I remember when I was younger, or like in my early 20s, I loved my religion, but I would feel kind of envious about converts. I was like, they they don't know what it's like to learn Islam culturally. They make
Mm,
that decision and they search and they educated themselves. And one thing that we often see in Muslim cultures is that, people don't even know why they fast during Ramadan, or they don't even know why they have to pray. And that's why it's so important indeed to remember that if we say, oh yeah, you realize all the benefits of Islam, it does come from a lot of education. The Quran itself is, some message are super clear and they speak to your heart instantly, and others are a little bit more complicated, and you do need to read the tafsir or to
Mhm.
hear or listen to scholars explaining what is going on and what it means. And that's why going to khutbas, for example, is a great way to build a deeper connection to the Quran. But yeah, obviously education is so important, and I think that is something that converts are very lucky to have. It's like a ni'mah in a way, you know. Of course,
Mhm.
you know, I feel like some people
Blank slate too.
they're like, exactly, like some people like, yeah, you're so lucky you got to experience like your all your the sins that we cannot cannot make, and then you get a clear state, you know. It's obviously Allah knows best and guided them, alhamdulillah. But you know, it's always funny to think about it that way. But yeah, the one thing that always that I never was envious of the sins, but I was envious of that like research aspect and like, you know, that crave of learning more. But
Mhm.
subhanallah, that I think that also can happen when you were Muslim your whole life, and then suddenly you like, you know, there's like a trigger, and you're like, I the more you learn, the more you want to learn, and the more you
Mhm.
know, and the more you the yeah, it's just subhanallah, it's like a virtuous circle, you know, like snowball effect.
Alhamdulillah.
Subhanallah.
It's interesting because I mean that was my husband, right? So my husband was a born Muslim, but like Muslim light. Let's put it that way, right? And so had it Allahu alam, but like had it not been for me poking and attacking and like being so rude. I don't know, like like I don't think he would have delved in deeper into his faith as much as he did, right? Because for him,
Subhanallah.
these things were given, but did he really understand exactly everything and why? No. So having someone like confront him helped him in his journey. So we ended up like growing together in our faith in that respect because like I said, while he was born and raised and I'm just getting started, it was really wonderful to like both sort of explore and like learn about the deen together in that respect. Alhamdulillah, I'm
Alhamdulillah.
how can I put this? I'm grateful for the perspectives that I have, and I'm grateful that I've been on the other side and I'm able to understand what it's like for
Yeah.
people on the outside looking in. So we do these things where we meet with students who come from the West and then they come here to learn more about the culture, and we happen to be their Muslim experience. And I always preface before I start, it's like, listen, no question is off the table. Whatever you ask or are thinking about, I've asked worse. So don't worry about offending us. Okay? We've heard it all. Like all. So please, family, be at ease. Ahlan wa sahlan. Right? So welcome, welcome.
Let's wrap up this episode. That I love how we said maybe we can try to not be that talkative, but I mean,
No.
no surprise here. And also, you know, the same. Honestly, the same thing happened with the other episodes. It's just that when we talk about Islam, it's just you could spend the whole day talking about it. There's just so much things to say. So,
I could keep going if you wanted to.
but let's wrap up the episode with some mindful advice. So, if you have to do it all over again, what would you do differently if there's anything you would do differently?
Honestly, I'm not sure if I would have done anything really differently, other than just have more faith and trust that things will be okay. I'm happy that I was never pressured into into like ticking off so many boxes when I first started, right? Because I was able to enter the faith willingly and convinced at every point of what it was that I was getting into. So, if I had any advice for others, I would say don't feel like you need to be pressured into doing everything all at once. Because I feel like when you do that, it becomes too much and it might actually make you resent the faith and run away, which we've seen happen before. Some people become like super zealous uh, about the deen, and then the smallest inconvenience happens, and then it all falls apart. So give yourself grace and
Yeah.
take your time if you need to.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned before, but personally, when converts reach out to me, the first thing they mention is always their family. and we address this, and we
Mm,
like I've heard stories, again, especially considering I live in France, so where Islam is a very
mm.
complicated topic. I've heard stories of
Public enemy number one.
I've heard stories of people going through very, very difficult situations once that they decided to embrace Islam. um One thing, if I remember correctly, you will correct me if I'm wrong, but um the one thing is that you don't know who you will inspire with your decision. And I think your
Mhm.
brother decided to get interested in
Yeah.
Islam. Did he
So,
convert?
I mean, again, it happened just on his own and via conversations about life and me expressing my views now as a Muslim. And he just thought that that was so beautiful. And then, and while I think he was like teetering on it, uh, it entered his heart. So it was such a pleasant surprise. Like I think it was last year when he told me like he'd be like he started with the fasting again because that's just it's easier to not do something, right? So but what was wonderful is when he told me that like he picked up the Quran and he started reading like that because yeah, that's very significant, and he started trying to learn how to pray. So for me that was so beautiful, and I think you truly don't know how Allah will inspire through you, and in more ways than one, right? Just having overall good character, is the biggest, I think, dawah that we can ever do for anyone, right? And which is why we'll leave this for another day, but like online, it's people forget that their online personas should be the same as their face-to-face one, right? So um
You mentioned something at the beginning when you said, like, as an Arab that wasn't Muslim, I had, like, Muslims were not really easy on me and were not always respectful, and because
mhm,
of that, I had a bad a bad image of Islam. I remember when we did our first call with Rachel, she said that the Ummah, especially online, it like is terrible, and that it doesn't show the beauty of Islam. And I think this
mhm.
is sad.
I mean, I say it all the time, like thank God I met someone who was reasonable, because otherwise I would have just carried on with the same opinion. And I think part of the thing that upsets me so much being online is that my particular page, while is dedicated to women who wear hijab, my videos, as a result of being humorous, have amassed a following of people who
Yeah.
aren't even Muslim, and they watch my page and they read through those comments, and it upsets me. I think the part that upsets me the most from these comments, because I've gotten used to it, like I'm used to all of the hate that I get, but it it
Yeah.
embarrasses me that I have non-Muslims reading those comments and seeing like these terrible
Yeah.
ambassadors of Islam in the page. And I've had people who say, see, this is why I don't like getting involved in religion. So imagine the disservice and the
Yeah.
sayyi'at, like the
Yeah.
bad deeds that you are collecting as a result of the way that you're carrying yourself, and you don't even
Yeah,
realize
and
it.
that's why, as a Muslim, your practice is important. But if you don't have al akhlaq, your good behavior, then
Mhm.
it's worth nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like, says it.
What's the point of your
Exactly.
faith?
You have, it's funny, like, a lot of women who wear hijab online and get criticized one way or another, even if sometimes it's a very kind reminder, they always say, I don't have to be the representative of my religion. But you are, even when you don't
Hmm.
wear hijab, the moment you say you you like are
Yeah.
proud of saying I'm Muslim, then you need to have the behavior that goes with it. You cannot speak badly, you cannot treat people badly. You need to think about those things. There's a responsibility, because we are the ummah, are of the best men that was ever created. Sometimes we forget about that. We
Hmm.
forget who is our messenger. And when you learn about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you realize what
Hmm.
good of a man he was, you're like, so I am
Hmm.
part of his community, and this is how I treat others. this doesn't align. This other doesn't align with our beliefs,
Mm.
and even just like the fact that Allah is watching us, right? It's like, why would you speak that
Mm.
way and not give a good example about Islam when you know that Allah is watching you and asks you to not do that? But we live in a weird world where I don't even have words, honestly.
See, I think because people have this thing where they want a virtue signal, right? So they want to show that they are supposedly awake, but then on the inside, that may
Yeah,
not necessarily be the case. And online is where we see that, because would you actually say that to someone's face in person, right? And if you wouldn't, then what makes you think that this is any better or any
yeah,
different, right? And for me, like, the way, for example, some sisters will be condescending towards others who are not necessarily, at doing the best hijab, right? Like, that's that
yeah,
you're not helping. I don't know in what world you think that
yeah,
those types of snarky and condescending comments will help. That will, if anything, push them
yeah,
further. So if the day she decides to take that off, she's going to hold you, she's going to blame you. And on judgment day, she will call you up and be like, well, look how she's treating me. Yani, why should I be motivated
yeah.
to keep doing
That
this?
is so true.
Right? So people really dismiss how much their words and their actions are going to weigh
Yeah,
on that day. Um, you know, Smiling and a kind word is literally free.
and it's a
And
sadaqah.
a
It's
gentle
considered as a
reminder.
sadaqah.
Yeah, it's a sadaqah. Exactly. So it's to your benefit. I mean, I had this one person yesterday, basically demand that I leave Islam if I don't follow Islam perfectly, right? So, asking me to commit kufr. So, and he thinks he's doing the deen of service, right? And I'm just thinking, like, does he realize that that's going to be held up
Him, yeah,
against him? Had he not just said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide you, he would have just picked up his hasanat
yeah,
and been on his way, because at the end of the day, nobody's responsible for the outcome, right? So, like, you are not a khalifa on people. Because if that was the case, like, that would have been during the time of the
alayhi
Prophet,
salam.
alayhi salatu wasalam. Your responsibility is to lead by example and give advice where it's fitting, and how the people respond to it is none of your business. You've done your
Exactly.
job, right? Um, and then, continue to remind. We're not saying you say it once and then that's it. But again, you have to be mindful of how and when and why you're saying what you're saying. Because if your intention is to feel superior, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that. And that's going to
Yeah.
be between you and Him. So may Allah
I
subhanahu wa ta'ala
mean,
guide us all and forgive us for
I
our
mean,
shortcomings. We're not perfect. I know I
no
certainly am
one
not
is.
perfect. And I pray that, that Allah accepts our intentions, and guide us to that
I
which is
mean, I
right.
think if right now someone
Ameen.
is listening, thinking, "Oh, I've been converting about Islam, and I still have doubts." Hopefully, inshallah, that we answered your questions. If you converted and still, struggle with certain aspects, I hope you got some answers as well. One thing that I want to say is that, again, you don't know who you will inspire, and it's not because you recently discovered Islam that you
Mm.
cannot inspire non-Muslims but also Muslim people. And personally, actually, the person that like made me want and made me certain about wanting to wear hijab is a convert. And I've been exposed to hijab my whole life.
Subhanallah.
My aunts in Algeria, they wear hijab. My grandma wears hijab. I never thought about it when I was 20, 21, 25. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna wear hijab when I'm old. And then, subhanallah, I watched that one video of a convert wearing a hijab. The first second, I was like, wait, she is a convert and she wears hijab. I've been Muslim my whole life and I don't wear it. And that was the first thing, that's like positive competition. And that's healthy competition in Islam. That's good. It's like
Mm.
my sister
Yeah.
is doing something great, mashallah, and I want to do it as well. And then it took me 3 years before
Hmm.
making the decision. And the one thing that really made me want to take that decision was then my sister deciding to wear it. randomly one day she was just like, you know what, I'm gonna wear hijab. And I was like, wait, I've been thinking about this for 3 years and I haven't started wearing it yet. And she's like younger than me and she made a decision, and alhamdulillah now
Mhm.
we even my mom now wears it, alhamdulillah. So it had like that super
MashaAllah. That's
positive
amazing.
effect, and all
Alhamdulillah.
started with like that convert who was wearing hijab and talking about it beautifully. So that's the first thing. Like, just know that
Mhm.
the moment you decide to join the Ummah, whether you're a convert or not, you're just equal to everyone, to everyone, to the eyes of Allah. Like, it's not because you're a convert that you are worth less than someone who has been Muslim their whole life, you know? And this is something, as you were saying, sometimes Muslims talk to each other in a way that they feel superior, and it's not just towards converts. They do
Mhm.
that even with other Muslims. That is something to
Yeah.
like try to fight as much as possible and not fall into, because God knows what is in our hearts and this is what matters the most. But really just like have um this reassurance that Allah is has chosen you to be Muslim, and that it doesn't matter where you're from in the world, like what was your journey. The what matters the most is that you made a decision. Alhamdulillah, you're Muslim now, you're going to become Muslim, and from now your life should be like an like completely new. It's just subhanallah,
Mhm.
sometimes I think about Islam and I'm like, that is literally the best thing ever. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't Muslim. I don't know how
Alhamdulillah.
you did it before being Muslim.
Mhm. I mean, again, I, the God consciousness was always there. But I think now I just had like a more solid system and a better way to view the world and to explain the stuff that I struggled with. So when you see disaster, you see calamity, you see pain in the world, without Islam, it's very difficult to make sense of that.
Yeah.
And Islam just, I was having this discussion with my mother where because she was also impressed by like how many people were picking up Qur'ans and trying to learn about Islam. I was telling her like, astaghfirullah, but even if you take Allah out of the equation, okay, the coping mechanisms in the faith, okay, is something to be odd, right? Because in this world where we see so much injustice happening, like those are mechanisms that help keep you sane, that help you, you know, keep going, right? So, I mean, I guess it's not fair to say to take Allah out of the equation because we do trust, but like this idea of a hereafter and the idea of, you know, like some ultimate justice that will be served, um, is very reassuring, right? So if you follow it for no other reason, at least for your own mental well-being, right? And that's the beauty of it, is that it compensates for all of that which you don't know or that you can't make sense
Yeah,
of.
that is beautifully said. And yeah, well, I think it's one of my recent posts, but I wrote that Islam is the only thing you have left when everything falls apart. And we have an actual
Mm.
representation of that right now. I know, like, when again when my dad passed away, I was just like, thank God I am Muslim, because facing death when
Mm.
you see someone die in front of your eyes, it's just you're naturally going to think about all of this, right? You're like, death and what
Mhm.
happens afterwards is such a complicated thing to fathom, only because no one no we don't have someone that died then came back and said, yeah, this is how it is when you die,
Yeah.
this is the only thing that no one knows how
Mhm.
it is afterwards, except when you have a religion that tells you this is what is going to happen afterwards and this is how you should live your life. So
Mhm.
the afterlife is the best possible. And yeah, I
Mhm.
completely agree with what you said. It's really just like taking that realization and embracing it, and again being grateful for it. I think we it came across pretty clearly in this episode that we're just very, very, very grateful, and that gratitude is just super important. That's a personal development lesson for you all. um,
There you go, in a nutshell.
but
Alhamdulillah.
thank you so much, Alisar, for this wonderful conversation.
I mean,
Um,
thank you so much, Asia, for having me. I mean, it's always a pleasure sitting with you and catching up. And I'm so grateful that that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has put you in my path. And
Likewise.
I'm grateful for the message that you're trying to bring. And I always love seeing your posts. They're always such a wonderful boost.
Alhamdulillah.
And they come at the best of times. So
People often say
jazakallahu
that,
khairan. And
but I
it,
think
it's divine timing.
exactly. I think it's just honestly, I've said that before, but when I write a post, is it's often based on something I'm currently thinking, and the way I see it is that if I feel this way, other people feel this way. I'm just a normal person, so hopefully,
Mhm,
inshallah, he can. I
mhm,
think one thing that we need now more than ever is a sense of like solidarity and sisterhood, and just feel like, oh, I can relate to that person. Maybe we don't have the same exact life or the same path and experiences, but there's this thing that we have in our hearts and that we all connect to each other. And
mhm,
I remember talking to a sister, and she said, we were having this conversation about family, and she said family is large. You think about family as your parents, your sisters, and everything, but family is also the ummah, because when you think about it, we call each other brothers and sisters. And this is something that we need to work on and we need to maintain. And I hope through what I do with the page and in the podcast that allows to strengthen that bond that we have between each other, inshallah.
Insha'Allah, insha'Allah.
So
Allahumma barik.
Allahumma barik. Big thank you so much. May Allah bless Ruuq with so much barakah. You've been doing such an
Oh,
amazing job. I love your page as well.
thank you,
You're
dear.
so funny, honestly. I love how you respond to those people that sometimes say really crazy things. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really bless you, your little family, and your business. If you have any question, you can send us a DM on Instagram. Do you read your DMs?
I do. I mean, I try. So,
Okay.
it gets overwhelming sometimes, but
I
I
know.
when I can.
So you can always try to reach out to us. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And we'll catch up in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Bye.
ستعود جميلة تلك الأيام نملوها حبا عطفا وأمان وتعود الأرض لحالها لجمالها